The breathing comes first, mechanical, rhythmic, the sound of a man kept alive by machinery because the man himself had stopped wanting to be. In the vision, fire is everywhere. Not the clean fire of a star or the honest fire of a forge. This is Mustafar fire, volcanic and black-edged and personal, and it clings to everything it touches. A temple burns. Children scatter. A woman screams his name from somewhere he can't reach. And the name she screams isn't Vader. It's Anakin. And that name comes out of the dark, like a blade between the ribs. He sees Padme on the medical table. The lines of her going flat. He sees the mask descending. He sees 20 years of nothing. He sees his son standing over him on a half-finished Death Star. The boy's face open and frightened and still choosing to love him anyway. Still saying, "Father, still. Do you like what I've shown you, Skywalker?" The voice is silk, over stone. Ancient. Amused. Your future. Something breaks. Not the vision. Not the fire. Something underneath both of those things. The part of a 21-year-old boy that was still running on fear. That had been running on fear for years without calling it by its name. The panic that had lived in his chest since Tatooine. Since his mother died in his arms in the Tusken camp. Since he first understood that love and loss were the same word in the universe's language. It breaks. And the tide goes out. The silence that replaces it is vast. Not empty. Vast, the way deep space is vast. The way the Force is vast when you stop fighting it and let it be what it actually is. The fire is still burning. The vision hasn't ended. He can still see Padme's face. Still hear the respirator that will one day become his own breath. Still feel the weight of a lightsaber in a hand that should never have been permitted to hold one that night. He sees all of it. He does not flinch. His shoulders drop. The rigid, cornered animal tension that has lived in them since he was 9 years old, and learning that Jedi didn't let themselves want things, it simply leaves, like a tide that was always going to recede. His breathing slows. The panic dissolves into something older and stranger and quieter. Something that has no name in the Jedi vocabulary he was trained on, and perhaps that is the point. He opens his eyes. He raises his right hand. 5 fingers. Flesh and bone, and the faint ridge of an old callus along the index finger from years of saber work that haven't happened yet. Won't happen yet. Might never have to happen now. Not durasteel. Not servos. Not the articulated agony of a prosthetic you forget to think of as a prosthetic because you've stopped thinking of yourself as a person. Real fingers. He stares at them for a long moment. The well of the dark side pulses around him. Black energy and cold stone and the specific crawling wrongness of a place the Force itself seems to be holding its breath in. And Anakin Skywalker, 45 years old inside the body of a boy half that age, sits in the dark and grieves and does not apologize for it. Padme, alive, whatever morning she is waking up to today, she is waking up to it. Not a medical table. Not a senator's funeral. A morning. Sunlight. Maybe. The Coruscant traffic noise she pretended to find annoying but had actually grown fond of. Luke. Not yet born. Not yet placed in an old man's arms on a desert planet while his father's body burned on a pyre. Not yet carrying the impossible weight of a galaxy's last hope in a frame too young for the burden. Not yet. Not ever, if he gets this right. Leia, the same. Obi-Wan. Still living. Still his brother in every way that mattered, and some ways that didn't. Still entirely unaware that his best friend had spent 20 years hating him for surviving. He closes his hand into a fist. Opens it again. The grief is real, and he lets it be real. Because that is the thing he learned the hard way. Feelings denied don't dissolve. They calcify. And a man built out of calcified feeling is what Vader had been. And he is done being Vader. He stands. The motion is deliberate. He rolls his shoulders back. The posture of a man who has stood in the armor, who knows what stillness looks like when it comes from the outside in, and has chosen instead the stillness that comes from the inside out. Young muscles respond easily. His body is a gift he does not intend to waste. Interesting. The sun steps from the dark. the way predators step from tall grass, with the casual authority of a thing that has never, in its existence, had genuine reason to be afraid of what it was walking toward. He is beautiful the way a fault line is beautiful. Power worn as a face. His eyes carry the yellow of the dark side, and the ancient amusement of a being who has run this particular game before, on this particular type of man, and found it reliable. He looks at Anakin. Something in his expression shifts. Barely, a fraction. Anakin watches him recalibrate and says nothing. "You've seen your future," the son continues. The silk stays in his voice, but there is something underneath it now. Curiosity, maybe, with a thin wire of uncertainty threaded through it. Most men fall to their knees. "I did fall to my knees," Anakin said. "You just weren't watching. And yet here you stand. Here I stand." The sun circles him slowly. It is the movement of a thing accustomed to being the most dangerous presence in any room, making sure its prey registers that fact. Anakin tracks him without turning his head. The Force extends outward from him like water, not a wall, not a weapon, simply a field of presence so total and steady and settled that the sun's circling keeps finding nothing to purchase on. "I showed you everything," the sun said. "Every failure, every death, every choice you will make that you cannot unmake. I showed you what you are. You showed me what I was," Anakin said. There's a distance between those two words. I know it better than anyone. The sun stopped. "You should be broken." It wasn't a taunt anymore. It was something closer to confusion, stated in the register of a thing that had never had to be confused before. "I have broken men more powerful than you, with half of what I showed you. I know you have." Anakin looked at him directly, not with aggression, not with the kind of aggressive eye contact men use to prove something. Just looked at him, the way you look at something you understand completely. "You showed me a nightmare, and I already lived it to the last day. I already saw what came after the nightmare. You don't have anything left in that particular hand." The blast came fast. Dark side energy, raw and enormous, the kind of force that had leveled mountains and broken the minds of lesser men before they had time to understand what was happening. The sun's hand extended, and reality bent slightly around it. Anakin raised his hand, not in the braced, straining way of a man trying to hold back more than he can hold. Not like a wall. More like a man opening a door he has opened 10,000 times, familiar, unhurried, certain of the mechanism. The energy met his palm and simply stopped. Not redirected. Not deflected. Stopped, the way a candle flame stops its still air. The dark side had nowhere to go, because the thing it was designed to break. The fear underneath the fear. The existential terror of loss and helplessness that dark side power is specifically engineered to find and exploit, was no longer present. He lowered his hand. "I am not the boy you tried to break," Anakin said. The sun watched him. The yellow eyes were unreadable, but the quality of the silence had changed. This was not the silence of a predator choosing its moment. This was the silence of something encountering, for the first time in a very long existence, a door it did not have a key for. "Test me again," Anakin said, "and you'll learn what an old soul in young hands can do." The sun looked at him for one more moment. Then he turned and moved into the dark, faster than the eye could track, gone between one breath and the next, not retreating. Anakin told himself charitably, just relocating, finding a softer target, finding the one person in this place whose heart was still open enough to be used as a door. Ahsoka, his eyes narrowed, not in fear. The feeling that moved through him was old and fierce, and had no use for fear. It was the specific, quiet fury of a man who had already watched one student be failed by him, who had carried that failure for 2 decades like a stone in the chest, and who was not, under any circumstances, going to allow history the satisfaction of rhyming. He moved. She is not Ahsoka anymore. That is the first thing he registers. Not the wrongness of her eyes, not the darkness bleeding through her Force signature like ink through water. Not even the twin lightsabers angled toward him at the ready. Those are symptoms. The thing underneath them, the actual crisis, is simpler and more terrible, the girl he trained, the one who argued with him about everything and was usually right, The one who laughed too loud in the temple corridors and apologized for nothing. She is not behind those eyes right now. Something else is. The daughter's temple rises behind her. Ancient white stone gone gray with age, vines pulling at the lower columns, the kind of architecture that exists in a place outside of time and has consequently stopped pretending otherwise. The light here is wrong too. The specific light of a world that has a dark side and a light side, and is currently listing hard in one direction. Everything slightly too shadowed, the colors slightly too muted, like a painting left too long in the rain. Ahsoka's eyes are yellow, not the full burning yellow of a man who has chosen the dark side and built a life there. Something worse than that, actually. The yellow of someone who hasn't chosen it at all, who is being worn by it, whose own eyes keep trying to surface through the color and failing. He can see her in there. That is the hardest part. She is present enough to be frightened and not present enough to stop what is happening to her, and the combination of those two facts hits him somewhere below the sternum with a precision that has nothing to do with the Force. She moves. Fast. Faster than she should be. Faster than the Ahsoka he trained 3 years ago, the dark side energy burning through her natural speed, and amplifying it into something that would have given his younger self genuine trouble. The first blade comes in a diagonal crosscut, the second sweeping low in the same motion, coordinated with the kind of mechanical efficiency that has nothing to do with Ahsoka's actual style, which is instinctive and clever and full of her own specific flourishes. Anakin doesn't draw his lightsaber. He steps inside the first cut, not away from it, inside it, closing the distance instead of creating it, and catches her wrist above the blade with his left hand. His right comes up and catches the second blade's flat in his palm, the energy singing against his skin, and he absorbs it with the same controlled stillness he used in the well, his entire Force presence throwing up no resistance, no aggression. No surface for the dark side parasite to identify as a threat and respond to. She wrenches, hard, throws her weight backward, and any other opponent she would have unbalanced completely, but he moves with her instead of against her, the same motion, the same direction, and somehow they end up with her back against his chest, both her wrists in his hands, both blades angled safely out and away. And neither of them hurt. He isn't restraining her. He is holding her the way you hold something that is trying to fall. "Ahsoka," he said. She makes a sound that is not her voice. Something layered under it, ancient and cold, using her throat to push something hateful out into the air. The dark side presence in her Force signature batters at him, a storm of it, aggressive and disorienting, designed to provoke either fear or anger and work with whichever one it gets. He gives it neither. The candle doesn't gutter. "I know you're in there," he said, quieter. "I can feel you." Snips. "You're right underneath it." She struggles. The yellow eyes angle back toward him, full of something that isn't Ahsoka, and knows it isn't Ahsoka, and has no intention of leaving quietly. He brings one hand up slowly, telegraphing every centimeter of the movement. Nothing sudden, nothing that could read as threat, and places his palm flat against her sternum. Over her heart. He can feel it hammering through her tunic, fast and frightened, the physical proof that she is still in there, still fighting. The body still faithfully reporting the fear that the infection hasn't quite managed to weaponize all the way. He closes his eyes. This is not a technique with a name in any Jedi text he was ever made to read. What he does in the dark behind his eyes is not the structured clinical meditation the Order taught, not a formal Force assertion or a push of will against the corruption. It is closer to memory than technique. He remembers what Ahsoka Tano is. Not what she will become. He knows that too. Knows the white. Knows the exile. Knows every extraordinary thing she will grow into over the years between now and the end. Not that. This, the Ahsoka standing in the hangar the first day he met her. Chin up. Arms crossed. Completely unintimidated by him in a way that had been so genuinely startling he'd had no idea what to do with it. The Ahsoka who had argued him into better tactics twice in the first week and acted like this was completely normal. The Ahsoka who laughed at his jokes when they were actually funny and told him when they weren't, which was a service nobody else in his life had been willing to provide. He finds that, the specific, irreducible signature of her, inside the storm. And he holds on to it. The dark side presence is vast. He doesn't fight it. Fighting it would require meeting it on its own terms, and its terms are fear and fury and the logic of force against force. Instead, he simply holds the piece of her he has found and refuses, with total, unhurried certainty, to let it go. His own presence radiates outward around her signature, not over it, not instead of it, around it. And the steadiness of him, the specific quality of a man with nothing left to be afraid of, begins to crowd the dark side energy the way a clear day crowds out fog. The infection needs fuel. Fear, isolation, the specific vulnerability of someone who believes, in the deepest part of themselves, that they might actually deserve what is happening to them. Ahsoka doesn't believe that. Not quite. Not all the way. And he anchors his presence to that uncertainty and uses it like a handhold. "You're not lost, Snips," he said, very low, the words not for the dark side but for her. "I know exactly where you are. I've been in the dark longer than you can imagine." She convulses against him, the infection pushing back, recognizing the mechanism now, trying to wall her off from the signal. He doesn't raise his voice. He doesn't push harder. He holds on. "And I promise you," he said, "this isn't it. Come back to me." The yellow leaves her eyes between one breath and the next. Not gradually, not in stages. It goes the way a fever breaks. The decisive, physical fact of a body reasserting its own nature once whatever was overriding it runs out of ground to stand on. Her lightsabers power down. Her legs go. She drops, and he drops with her. Both of them to the ground, and he wraps his arms around her before she can hit the stone. She shakes. "Sky Guy," the voice is raw, scraped out, completely hers. "What? I can't. What happened to me? You're all right," he said. The words came out with a steadiness that had nothing performed in it. "You're back. That's all that matters right now. I was going to." She pulls back enough to look at him, horrified. "I was going to hurt you. You didn't. I tried. You didn't," he said again. And the repetition is deliberate, the same word twice, because some things need to be said more than once before they become real. He keeps his hands on her shoulders, lets her see his face, calm, unhurt, entirely unbothered by the fact of what she was 30 seconds ago. "The thing that tried to hurt me wasn't you. You know the difference. I know you know it." She swallows, looks at him for a long moment, working through something complex and frightened behind her eyes, and then something in her steadies. Not all the way, she is still shaking slightly, still coming back into herself in increments, but enough. Then she really looks at him. "You're different," she said. It is not an accusation. It is the careful statement of someone cataloging something real. "You feel different. Even now, something changed, Sky Guy. Something in the Force." Her brow folds. "It's not bad. It's just, I don't have a word for it." "Neither do I," he said honestly. He helped her to her feet. Neither of them had heard Obi-Wan arrive. He stood at the edge of the clearing with the expression of a man who had prepared himself for several possible outcomes on his walk here, and had not prepared himself for this one. His eyes moved from Ahsoka, upright, recovering, eyes clear, to Anakin, kneeling beside her with no lightsaber drawn, radiating the specific quality of stillness that Obi-Wan had spent 14 years watching his former student conspicuously fail to produce. The composure on his face did something complicated. A crack in it, small and quickly managed. The way a man manages something that has genuinely surprised him when he has a professional investment in not being surprised. "Anakin," he said, his voice doing the careful, measured thing it did when it was also doing something else underneath. "What happened to you in there?" Anakin rose. The motion unhurried. He looked at his master, his brother, the word he had never said out loud in either life, and had carried quietly for all of both of them. And a small, real smile crossed his face. Not the bright, reflexive grin of a young man performing confidence, something older and warmer, and more certain of itself. "I finally grew up, Master," he said. It just took longer than either of us expected. Obi-Wan held his gaze. In it, the unmistakable work of a brilliant man trying to reconcile what he was feeling in the Force with the categories available to him. The categories were insufficient. He seemed to know this. He said nothing for a moment, which from Obi-Wan Kenobi was its own kind of statement. Ahsoka looked between them. Then she looked at the deeper dark beyond the temple's outer wall, the direction of the Father's domain, where the light of Mortis was already shifting, already beginning to remember that it had a nature other than this. And she felt what was moving there, the weight of something vast coming into alignment, and she understood without being told that whatever had changed her master in that well, the conversation it required was not finished. Not even close. Anakin turned toward it. His expression moved from the warmth of a moment before into something quieter and more deliberate. Resolution, settling into the line of his jaw like stone setting. He knew exactly what conversation was coming next. He had been ready for it his entire life. The world tree does not grow. That is the first thing the body understands, before the mind catches up to articulate it. Trees grow, they reach, they strain toward light. They are in the perpetual business of becoming. This one simply is. Its roots go down into rock that has not shifted in 10,000 years. Its canopy touches a sky that does not move. It exists the way axioms exist, not achieved, not maintained, just permanently, weightlessly true. And standing beneath it produces the specific, vertiginous sensation of being in the presence of something that has no interest in your timeline. The Father's chamber opens beneath it, not a room in any architectural sense, more a clearing. A place where the roots have decided not to be, a negative space worn smooth by something that has stood in it for longer than most civilizations have existed. The light here is neither the infected murk of the well nor the clean gold of the daughter's temple grounds. It is something between. Ancient, neutral, the light of a scale held in perfect stillness. The daughter stands at the chamber's edge. She is watching Anakin the way the Force watches everything, without agenda, without urgency, with the complete and unsettling attention of something that perceives time differently than mortals do. Her face carries the aftermath of what happened in the well, not injury. The daughter does not have injuries in any conventional sense, but something has shifted in her bearing. She had expected the dark side to win. It did not. She is still integrating that. Anakin met her gaze. Held it for a moment. He gave her a small nod, the kind you give someone across a room when words are wrong for the distance. She returned it. The Father stepped forward from the shadow of the tree. He was ancient in the way that precluded description. Not old. Age implies a direction, a starting point, and an accumulating distance from it. The Father simply existed in a register beyond that, the way gravity exists beyond complaint or preference. His face held everything, and weighted none of it. His eyes were the deep, still amber of something that had seen the entire history of the Force from a fixed point, and found it, on the whole, unsurprising, until now. "I know what you are carrying," the Father said. His voice was the voice of the hum-given language. Every memory, every choice. The weight of a life fully lived and a death already died. He stopped 3 meters from Anakin and regarded him with something that was not quite compassion and not quite assessment, but shared something with both. It is not meant to exist here, inside a living mind, in a living body, at this point in time. The architecture of the Force was not built to hold it. "I know," Anakin said. "Then you understand why it must be removed. I understand why you think it must be." The Father's expression didn't change. But something in the air between them did, a slight increase in the weight of the space, the way a room gets heavier when the person in authority realizes they are not in the conversation they thought they were in. "You would refuse," the Father said. "Not a question." "I would explain," Anakin said. "And then you would understand. And then you wouldn't ask again." A long pause. The roots of the world tree held still. The light held still. The daughter at the chamber's edge held still, watching. "Speak," the Father said. Anakin took a breath. Not a steadying breath. He didn't need steadying. A breath the way a man takes a breath before doing something that deserves the pause. "Your model of balance," he said. is containment. You keep your son in his domain and your daughter in hers. You stand between them and hold the tension. The dark side here, the light side there, and you in the middle making sure neither one bleeds into the other. He watched the father's face. That's not balance. That's quarantine. It is stability, the father said, with the quiet certainty of something that has held the same position for millennia. Without the separation, you're afraid they destroy each other. I know. Anakin held his ground, not aggressively, simply as a man who knows where he is standing. I've thought about your situation for a long time. Longer than you'd think, and I understand the fear behind it. I do. But there's something your model can't account for, because nothing in your existence has ever given you the data for it. He let that sit for a moment. You've spent your entire existence keeping the dark and the light apart so they can't destroy each other, he said. I spent 20 years being both of them at once. The father was still. I fell, Anakin continued, and the word came out plain and undefended, the way only a man who has made complete peace with a fact can say it. All the way. I became the thing your son is, the avatar of it, the weapon of it, the face the galaxy put on the dark side for 2 decades. I did things I cannot undo. I burned things that will not grow back. A beat. And I still found my way out. Not because someone contained the dark side in me. Not because someone locked it away or severed it or balanced it against something else. Because I looked at what I had become, in the full light of what it actually meant, and I chose differently. The hum of the world tree had gone very quiet. That's the data you don't have, Anakin said. The dark side isn't something you contain, Father. It's something you have to look at, and grieve, and choose not to become, every single day. Not once. Not in a moment of heroic decision. Every day. That kind of balance doesn't come from separation. It comes from integration. From a person who has held both things inside themselves and learned to carry them without being destroyed by either. He took one step forward. You built Mortis to embody balance. I understand that. But the balance Mortis embodies is a held breath. It's 2 forces in permanent standoff, maintained by your presence. And the moment you're gone, he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. They both knew what the moment he was gone looked like. It looked like the canon. What I'm carrying in my memory is not a burden. It's proof. It's the only proof that exists anywhere in the galaxy that a mortal can hold the full weight of the dark side and the full weight of the light side in the same body at the same time, and choose, deliberately, to be neither and both. He stopped. That's not dangerous to the Force, he said. That is the Force. The living version of it. The version that doesn't require a God standing in the middle, holding everything apart. The silence that followed was not empty. It was the silence of something enormous being reconsidered. The father looked at him for a long time. The amber eyes moved through something slow and interior. Not doubt, exactly, but recalibration. The specific, unhurried adjustment of a mind large enough that recalibrating it takes longer than a human breath. Then he did something Anakin had not entirely expected. He bowed his head. Not a deep bow, a degrees of inclination that registered as profound precisely because of what was doing the inclining. An acknowledgement from the embodiment of balance, that it had just been shown something about balance that it had not previously held. The chosen one, the father said quietly, fulfilled twice over. At the edge of the chamber the daughter exhaled, a long, slow release, and with it the last of the dark energy that had been clinging to Mortis's light began to ease. The color in the stone changed. Incrementally, the gray warming toward white again. The oppressive weight in the air lifting fraction by fraction, the sky above the world tree shifting toward something more honest. Not all at once. Not dramatically. The way a room comes back to itself after a window is opened. Gradual. Real. The return of something that was always supposed to be there. The daughter crossed the chamber toward him. She moved the way light moves in still water, without effort, without urgency, and when she stood before him she placed one hand briefly against his cheek. The gesture was not romantic and not parental. It was something the language of mortals didn't have a category for. A blessing, maybe, in the oldest sense of the word. An acknowledgement from something luminous, that it had recognized something luminous. She stepped back. She said nothing. She didn't need to. The father watched this, and said nothing either. Then he looked at Anakin with the expression of a man who has prepared an offer and is no longer entirely certain it is adequate. "When you leave Mortis," he said, "I can restore you. Seal the memories, return you to who you were before the well. A clean departure. No wait." "No," Anakin said. The father considered this. Then he nodded once, slowly, as a man concedes a point he has come to believe is correct. "No," he agreed. "Not you." He raised one hand. The light in the chamber shifted, a long, slow exhalation of it, warm and final, moving through the stone and the roots and the still air like a tide making its last, decisive choice about the shore. The ship hum comes back like a memory of the body. Not dramatic, not a rush of sensation or a violent return to the physical. Just the gradual reassertion of the ordinary, the slight vibration in the deck plating, the recycled air smell of a military vessel. The distant background conversation of instruments doing their work. The pocket dimension releasing them the way sleep releases a dreamer. Not all at once, but in layers, the real world reassembling itself around them until Mortis is simply gone and the twilight is simply there. And the stars outside the viewport are the regular stars of a regular galaxy, with no cosmic architecture behind them. Anakin is sitting on the floor of the cargo hold. He doesn't remember deciding to sit. He is simply sitting, back against the curved interior wall, knees up, forearms resting on them, looking at nothing in particular. The hold smells like machine oil and the specific synthetic cleaner the Republic uses on all its vessels. A smell so ordinary and so familiar that it does something unexpected to the back of his throat. He lets it. Outside this room, Ahsoka is sleeping in the narrow bunk in the port cabin, exhausted down to something below the cellular level, her force signature the deep and guileless quiet of someone who has been through more than their body understood, and is being made to rest whether they like it or not. He checked on her twice without going in. She is fine. She will be fine. Outside this room, Obi-Wan is in the cockpit doing what Obi-Wan does when he needs to think, running manual navigation checks that don't need running, recalculating hyperspace coordinates that are already correct, keeping his hands occupied while his mind works on something his hands can't help with. Anakin knows this without needing to look. He knows a great many things now that he didn't know this morning, and not all of them are tactical, and not all of them are comfortable, and he is sitting on the floor of the cargo hold giving himself the space to hold them, without organizing them yet. 2 lifetimes. He turns his right hand over in the low light. Studies the palm. The calluses are in the right places, saber work, piloting, the particular friction of a life that uses its hands, but the hand is young, uninjured, complete. 5 real fingers. He spent 20 years without them. He spent 20 years without a great number of things he currently possesses. Warmth, choice, the ability to feel rain, the simple mechanical fact of a human heartbeat that no machine was keeping honest. He spent 20 years without her. Padme, the name moves through him the way names move through people who love someone the way he loves her. Not as a word, but as a complete sensory event, specific and total. The particular way she tilts her head when she is pretending to consider a position she has already decided on. The intelligence in her eyes that she sometimes deliberately underplays in rooms full of men who need to feel clever. The precise, non-negotiable quality of her courage, which he has always recognized because it looks completely unlike his own. Quieter, more patient, and ultimately more durable. She is alive. She is on Coruscant right now, probably in the Senate, probably arguing for something the Republic should have done 3 months ago but hasn't, because the Republic moves at the speed of institutional cowardice. She does not know that her husband, the boy she married in secret on Naboo with a protocol droid, and a Naboo priest as witnesses, spent 20 years as a monster and came back. She will know. He will tell her. Not yet. Not today. Not over a comm line. but she will know. He breathes out slowly. The grief is real and he doesn't manage it down. He lets it be the size it actually is, which is enormous. And he sits with the enormity of it without being destroyed by it. Because that is the thing he has learned. The thing that took 2 lifetimes to learn. Feeling it is not the same as being ruled by it. He stays there until the feeling has said what it needed to say. Then, he stands. Obi-Wan heard him coming before he reached the cockpit doorway. Of course he did. 14 years of training had made them each an open book to the other, readable at 20 paces by Force sense alone. Though what Obi-Wan was currently reading, Anakin suspected, was not a book he had the context for yet. He leaned in the doorway. Obi-Wan was doing exactly what he'd predicted, stylus moving over a navigation display that needed no adjustment. And there was something so specific and so unchanged about the image that it landed somewhere between comfort and grief. "You've recalculated that jump 3 times, Anakin said. Obi-Wan set the stylus down. I find repetition clarifying. You find it distracting. There's a difference. A pause. Obi-Wan turned in the pilot's chair and looked at him with the expression he reserved for situations where professional equanimity and genuine concern were competing for the same real estate. Sit down. Anakin. Anakin sat, the co-pilot's seat, where he had spent hundreds of hours across dozens of missions, the worn fabric familiar under his hands. The stars moved past the viewport at sublight speed, unhurried, indifferent, beautiful. Something happened to you in that well, Obi-Wan said. It was not phrased as a question, but it had a question's shape. Yes. And you're not going to tell me what? Not yet. Anakin held his master's gaze. Not because I don't trust you. I need you to know that part first. Obi-Wan studied him. The study was thorough and professional, and underneath both of those things, personal in a way Obi-Wan rarely permitted to be visible. His brow folded slightly. You feel. He paused. Started again. In the Force, you feel like yourself. But a different order of yourself. As though, another pause. The man who always had the words working, for once, to find them. As though you were a river, and you've become an ocean. The same water, a different scale entirely. Anakin said nothing. That's not nothing, Obi-Wan said quietly. Whatever changed in there, it's not nothing. No, Anakin agreed. It's not. They sat with that for a moment. Outside the viewport, the stars performed their usual indifference. The ship hummed its steady note. Are you all right? Obi-Wan asked. The question stripped clean of everything except what it was. Anakin thought about it. Not as a deflection, he had spent a lifetime deflecting this exact question, but because it deserved an honest answer, and honest answers required a moment's honest accounting. I'm the best I've been in a very long time, he said. Possibly ever. A beat. That's going to take some getting used to. Something in Obi-Wan's face did something complicated and quiet. Not quite relief. He was still worried, still processing, still holding the weight of what he'd felt at the daughter's temple against the limited vocabulary available to explain it. But underneath the worry, something warmer. Something that had been waiting a long time to have a reason to be there. He nodded once, let it go. Turned back to the viewport. For what it's worth, he said, after a moment, in the careful tone of a man offering something he isn't entirely sure will land correctly. Whatever the Force did to you on that planet, it appears to have agreed with you. High praise, Anakin said. Don't push it. He found Ahsoka in the port cabin doorway an hour later, leaning against the frame in the slightly unsteady way of someone who has slept hard and woken confused. Her eyes were clear, Togrutan montrals slightly askew, the way they got when she'd been horizontal for a while. She was looking at him across the short corridor with the expression she'd worn at the daughter's temple, that careful, cataloging look, the one that had named the change in him without being able to define it. He waited. You're still doing it, she said. The weird thing. Probably going to keep doing it for a while, he said. Fair warning. She considered this with the solemnity of someone taking it seriously. Then, because she was Ahsoka, something behind her eyes shifted. The habitual return to the mode of a person who has decided that if something isn't actively threatening her, she might as well find out if it's interesting. "Are you okay, Skygi?" "Actually?" "Actually," he said. "Yes." She looked at him for another long moment. Then she laughed, short, surprised, the involuntary kind that happens when something lands as more real than expected. And the laugh was so completely hers, so fully the laugh of a girl who was alive and present and entirely herself, that it hit him somewhere he couldn't have named. He smiled. The real kind. The kind that costs something. "Get some water," he said. "You look terrible. You look weird. Those aren't mutually exclusive." She made a face at him, entirely Ahsoka, entirely 14, entirely fine, and retreated back into the cabin, and he listened to the small, ordinary sounds of her moving around in there, and let himself feel the weight of what it meant that she was doing it. The viewport at the end of the corridor framed Coruscant, still distant, still the size of a coin. The planet city's lights visible even from here, the artificial glow of a billion lives going about their business, unaware that anything had changed. He looked at it. His expression moved. Not fear, not the old reflexive anxiety that used to rise in him every time he approached that planet with its politics, and its manipulation, and its carefully maintained, immaculately presented trap. Something colder than that. More deliberate. The expression of a man who knows exactly what is waiting for him on the surface of that glowing city, who has known it for 2 lifetimes, and who has spent the last several hours deciding precisely what he intends to do about it. Palpatine was down there, smiling, in all probability, preparing his welcome, arranging his face into the warm paternal configuration Anakin had spent years interpreting as love, and could now read, with total clarity, as the performance it had always been. He doesn't know yet, Anakin thought. He's expecting the boy he sent to Mortis. Frightened, attached, desperate to protect the things he loves and therefore exquisitely controllable. He has no idea what's coming home. Palpatine was already there. That was the first thing. The Chancellor standing at the edge of the landing platform in the thin Coruscant wind, robes arranged with the unconscious precision of a man who understood that presentation was power, and had never once in his adult life been unaware of how he looked. 2 red guards flanked him at the regulation distance. His face held the warm, crinkled welcome of a grandfather who has been counting the hours. Anakin walked down the boarding ramp and let none of what he knew reach his face. The mental shields went up with the ease of a door closing, not effort, not strain, simply the practiced motion of a discipline he'd spent 20 years perfecting under the most demanding conditions imaginable. Behind them he placed everything: the well, the father, 2 lifetimes of memory, the precise and total knowledge of what the man walking toward him with open arms had done, and was doing, and intended to do. He placed it all behind the door, and closed it, and stood in the residual warmth of a return from a difficult mission, a young Jedi Knight glad to be home. Palpatine embraced him. The Chancellor's hands on his shoulders, familiar, paternal, the grip of a man who had spent years calibrating exactly how much physical warmth to apply to exactly this person. Anakin returned the embrace. "My boy," Palpatine said, pulling back to look at him with those perceptive, pale eyes. "You had us all quite worried. The mission was more complicated than expected." Anakin said. "The reports will explain most of it. And the rest? A beat." Anakin held the Chancellor's gaze with the easy, open steadiness of someone who had nothing to hide and found the question reasonable. Palpatine's eyes moved across his face. That habitual, expert reading. The scan that had stripped the emotional state off every person Anakin had watched him work for years. And found, this time, a surface that offered nothing to grip. He saw the flicker. Barely, a fraction of adjustment in those careful eyes, something recalibrating without revealing that it was doing so. The absence of what Palpatine expected to find, the low-grade anxiety, the hunger for reassurance, the specific vulnerability of a young man returning from something frightening, registered as a data point he didn't immediately know what to do with. "You seem different, my boy," Palpatine said. "Mortis has a way of putting things in perspective." "Chancellor," the smile returned, warm and complete. A man who has decided that what he is seeing is harmless, even slightly boring, a Jedi achieving serenity, nothing more threatening than that. The arrogance of it was architectural. It was built into the load-bearing walls of how Palpatine understood the world, and Anakin could see it, and was quietly grateful for it. "Of course," Palpatine said. "Of course it does. Rest, my boy. We'll speak more in the morning." Anakin nodded, stepped back, let the platform wind and the small ceremony of departure carry them through the goodbye. He did not look back as he walked away. The protocol droid was in the entry hall when he arrived. He spoke 6 words to it. The droid departed with the slightly affronted efficiency of a machine that processes the request before the feeling, and then the apartment was quiet. Padme's apartment, the specific hush of a space shaped by its inhabitants' discipline, everything in its place. The thin Coruscant light coming through the transparent steel at the angle it came through at this hour, familiar down to the shadow it put on the far wall. Anakin moved through the apartment, finding the surveillance devices by memory. Not the Force, memory. He knew where every one of them was. He had been the one, in another life, to ensure they were maintained. He deactivated them one by one with the particular technical fluency of a man who had spent years being more machinery than human, his hands moving with a calm, unhurried competence that had nothing to do with haste, and everything to do with thoroughness. When the last one was dark, he stood in the center of the room and breathed. Padme stood in the doorway of the bedroom. She had heard him come in. She was in senatorial clothes still, late hours being the price of the work she had chosen, and she was looking at him with the expression she wore when she was deciding how to begin a conversation she suspected was going to be significant. Senator's face. The face that gave away nothing until she decided what to give away. "You deactivated the surveillance," she said. "Yes." "All of it?" "All of it." A pause. She was reading him the way she always read him, not the Force, not whatever Jedi perception he sometimes forgot she didn't have, but something subtler and more intimate than either. The specific intelligence of a woman who had loved him long enough to know what his face did when he was frightened, and what it did when he was hiding something, and what it did when those were the same thing. They were not the same thing tonight. That was what she was trying to categorize. "Ani," she said. Quietly, "What happened on Mortis?" He crossed the room and took both her hands in his. She let him. Her eyes stayed on his face, patient, waiting, with the quality of attention she brought to everything that mattered, total, unhurried, prepared for the answer to be complicated. "I need to tell you something," he said. "Several things, and I need you to let me get through them before you respond, because some of them are going to be." He stopped. Chose the honest word, hard. Her hands tightened slightly on his. "Tell me." So he told her. Not all at once. In the waves the outline demanded, the escalating structure of a truth too large to deliver in a single blow. First, the simplest layer. Something happened in the well, something changed. He is not the same person who flew to Mortis. She absorbed this with the stillness of someone holding themselves ready for what comes next. Then, the fall. His own words, plain and undefended, the clinical shape of it, the fear, the manipulation, the marriage and the secret, and the dream, and the choice he made in Palpatine's office, the choice he had spent every day since wishing he could unmake. He did not spare himself in the telling. He had learned the hard way that self-sparing was just another word for dishonesty, and she deserved better than a curated version of the worst thing he had ever done. Her face changed as he spoke, not into horror. She was too controlled for horror to arrive before understanding did. Into something careful and very still. The expression of a woman processing something her mind was not immediately willing to assemble into a complete picture, because the complete picture was the temple, she said. Her voice, very level. The younglings. Yes, the word sat between them. He didn't soften it. "Ani, I know," he said. "I know what I'm telling you. I'm not asking you to, I'm not asking anything. I'm telling you because you deserve the truth. All of it. You're the only person in the galaxy who has ever deserved all of it from me." She was still for a long moment. Her hands had not left his. Then, quietly, tell me the rest. So he told her the rest. The twins. Luke and Leia. He said their names carefully, feeling the weight each one carried. Two people who did not yet exist, who were currently the size of a theoretical and a hope, and whatever biological miracle was quietly underway. Right now. Unannounced, undetected, growing into the people who would between them hold the entire future of the Force. He watched her face when he said it. The still surface broke. Not into grief. Into something more complicated and more overwhelming than grief. The specific emotion of a person hearing something simultaneously impossible and, at the deepest level of their intuition, already known. Her hand moved to her abdomen. The gesture was unconscious. Confirming, the knowledge arriving in her body before her mind had finished processing the sentence. Twins, she said. Luke and Leia. He watched her. They are extraordinary. Both of them. In ways I don't have words for yet. She looked at him. Her eyes were bright. And the brightness came from multiple directions at once. The devastation of the earlier confession still present. Now alongside this, the two things occupying the same space in the way that only the most significant moments of a life manage to. I should be terrified of you right now, she said. Her voice steady. Her hand still in his. You should be, he said. A silence. Long and honest, the kind that does the work of several conversations at once. I'm not. She looked at him, through him, the way she sometimes did. The uncanny precision of her perception finding something behind the surface of his face that sensors and training and even force sensitivity would miss. I can feel it, Ani. Whatever's inside you now, it isn't the thing you're describing. Her grip tightened. Real, certain, it's the opposite of it. He didn't speak. The feeling that moved through him at those words was too specific and too large for speech, and he had learned not to be afraid of that anymore. She reached up and put her hand against his face. So what do we do? She asked. Quiet, fierce, the voice of a woman who has processed something enormous and emerged from it not diminished but pointed, all of her energy moving toward the next decision, the next action, the irreversible commitment of someone who has made up her mind. He covered her hand with his. We save everyone, he said. All of them. Starting with the clones. Outside, Coruscant blazed its endless, indifferent light across 10 million windows. Neither of them slept. The ocean had no bottom that the eye could find. Tipoca City rose from the water the way all things built by beings who distrust nature tend to rise, aggressively vertical, self-contained, sealed against the elements with the particular architectural arrogance of a structure that has decided the planet it occupies is a problem to be managed. White towers and sealed corridors and the smooth, sterile logic of a place designed for production. Everything efficient. Everything purposed. The aesthetic of a facility that had never once been asked to consider what the things it produced might want. Anakin walked its corridors with his hands at his sides and his face arranged into the pleasant, mildly interested expression of a Republic general conducting a routine capability review. Beside him, a Kaminoan administrator named Taun Wei moved with the fluid, crane-like gait of her species, narrating production statistics with the practiced enthusiasm of someone who believed that numbers were the most interesting language available. Behind him, Ahsoka matched his pace with the professional composure of a Padawan on official business, which she was. And Rex walked at the rear of the party with the blank, attentive bearing of a captain doing exactly what captains do. Rex, who Anakin had spoken to privately on the shuttle down. Not much. He'd learned the hard way that Rex didn't need much. I found out something about the inhibitor chips, Rex, he'd said, in the quiet of the shuttle's rear compartment. The Kaminoan delegation's still 2 minutes from docking, something the Kaminoans never told any of you. Rex had looked at him for a long moment. The particular stillness of a soldier deciding whether a piece of information is the kind that changes things. Sir, Rex had said. Then, after a beat, what do you need? That was Rex. That had always been Rex. The server core was at the facilities center, because of course it was. The Kaminoans were nothing if not structurally legible. 3 levels down from the main corridor, accessible through a security checkpoint, that Ahsoka was currently engaging in animated, technically detailed conversation about cloning matrix sequencing. Her Padawan's curiosity deployed as a precision instrument while Rex managed the secondary door with the unhurried authority of a captain who belonged in every room he entered. Anakin had 40 minutes. The room was the size of a cathedral. He stood in the entrance for a moment and simply looked at it. The server stacks rose 6 stories on either side, black and silver columns, blinking in the steady diagnostic rhythm of a system processing continuous data, the air between them cool and slightly ionized, the smell of controlled temperature and managed electricity. Walkways crossed the upper levels at intervals, accessible by lift columns at the far ends. The floor was seamless white, interrupted only by the data conduit channels running in geometric patterns toward the central access terminal. At the room's heart, a console, the kind of interface that didn't announce its own importance because it didn't need to. The understated design of something that had been built to do one job, and had been doing it without interruption or doubt since the day it was installed. He walked toward it. 20 years of being more machine than man had taught him things no Jedi training covered. The specific literacy of systems. The way information architecture had weight and texture if you knew how to feel for it. The instinctive understanding of how a network wanted to be navigated, and where it placed the things it considered important. He had developed that literacy because he'd had no choice, because the suit had required it, because surviving 20 years as a half-machine Sith Lord demanded an intimacy with technology that most beings never needed. He had never expected to be grateful for it. He sat at the console. The interface came up clean. Kaminoan design. Elegant, indirect. The logic of it requiring a specific kind of lateral thinking that most Republic personnel found obscure. He moved through the menu architecture the way you move through a familiar building in the dark, from memory, without hesitation, finding corners and doorways by the knowledge of where they had always been. The inhibitor chip protocol lived 3 levels deep in the clone medical matrix, filed under a subdirectory labeled with a Kaminoan administrative designation that translated, approximately, to behavioral compliance architecture. The label had the bureaucratic blandness of something designed to be looked past. He had looked past it once. He would not look past it again. He opened it. The scope of what he was looking at took a moment to resolve, not because it was technically complex, but because the human mind, even his, needed a breath before processing certain kinds of information. 200,000 entries, each one a clone trooper. Each one a man with a name and a designation and a living signature in the Force, currently carrying, without knowledge or consent, a device in his brain designed to override his identity at a word. Palpatine's word. Order 66. He had given that order himself once. He had heard it come out of his own mouth as a young man in armor, standing on a ship bridge, and he had felt nothing in the moment. Or rather, he had felt the dark side's version of purpose, which was indistinguishable from feeling nothing, and the clones around him had stopped being men in that instant, had become instruments, had turned and fired, and the galaxy had changed in an afternoon. He sat with the full weight of that for exactly as long as it took to breathe in and breathe out. Then he began to work. The deactivation protocol wasn't a single command. He had known it wouldn't be. The Kaminoans had designed against exactly that kind of vulnerability, which was professionally admirable and, today, an obstacle. It was a cascading sequence, nested through 7 subsystems, each requiring independent authentication that the primary system would verify against the others. A closed loop. Elegant, genuinely difficult to break without leaving a trace. He didn't intend to break it. He intended to convince it. 40 minutes became 30. Became 20. He heard them before he saw them. The precise, unhurried footsteps of a Kaminoan administrator moving through the access corridor with the calm of someone who believed they had every right to be where they were going, which they did. Lama Su, the facility's prime minister, whose schedule had not included this corridor, whose schedule had been adjusted by a minor and untraceable clerical error in the administrative system, because Anakin had introduced the error before they'd landed. The error had a shelf life of 17 minutes. The footsteps slowed. Ahsoka's timing was, as always, immaculate. He heard the footsteps redirect toward her voice, heard Rex's slightly overlapping acknowledgement of the Prime Minister, the smooth social machinery of two people who were very good at occupying someone's attention, engaging it from two directions at once. He had 3 minutes. He used 2.5. The final command sat in the input field, cursor blinking, patient, indifferent, waiting for the weight of his decision. He looked at it. The deactivation was permanent, irreversible through this interface. 200,000 chips, simultaneously inert, and no one in the facility would know it had happened, and Palpatine would never even learn what had been taken from him until the moment he reached for Order 66, and found it gone. He thought about Rex, outside, Rex who had tried to warn Ahsoka, in the life Anakin was quietly dismantling. Rex who had removed his own chip and spent decades running because there was no other option. Rex who had never been given the choice he deserved. He executed the command. The system processed it in silence. No confirmation sound, no visual flourish, just a status change in a field on a screen in a room the size of a cathedral, and 200,000 men whose names most of the Republic had never bothered to learn were quietly, irrevocably free. He closed the interface, stood, checked the room the way he'd been trained, surfaces, angles, anything that shouldn't be where it was, everything clean. He walked back through the cathedral of servers and out into the corridor and found Ahsoka winding down a genuinely impressive monologue about growth acceleration rates. Rex managing the geometry of the hallway with the practiced ease of a man who has been a diversion many times before and has no feelings about it. Lama Su regarded Anakin with the faintly assessing look of a Kaminoan who had found the timing of the general's reappearance mildly interesting and had filed it somewhere to think about later. Finished? Ahsoka asked. Everything's exactly as it should be, Anakin said. They walked back toward the landing platform. The rain was still coming, the same rain, the same rhythm. The planet entirely indifferent to what had just occurred inside its most famous building. The ocean below the platform's struts did what oceans do, which is everything and nothing, enormously, without comment. Ahsoka fell into step beside him. He could feel her looking at him from the side. "What's next?" she asked. His expression shifted, the warmth of the facility, the quiet satisfaction of a thing accomplished, moving aside for something more deliberate. Not fear, not the old anxious darkness that used to gather at the edges of every plan this complex, just the clear, grim certainty of a man who knows the shape of what comes next and has been ready for it for a very long time. "Now," he said, "we deal with the real monster." Palpatine sat alone in his office at the hour when Coruscant's artificial night was deepest. The city blazed outside his window the way it always blazed. Relentless, indifferent, 10 million lights performing the business of civilization without caring who directed it, and the Chancellor sat in the specific quality of stillness that belonged entirely to him. Not the stillness of a man at rest. The stillness of a man thinking, which in Palpatine's case was the most dangerous condition he could be in. Something was wrong with Anakin Skywalker. He turned the observation over in his mind the way a jeweler turns a stone, examining each face, each angle, looking for the flaw or the value, finding both in different lights. The boy had returned from Mortis changed. This was not, in itself, surprising. Mortis was not the kind of place that returned its visitors unaltered, and Palpatine had factored a range of psychological outcomes into his planning. Trauma, disorientation, possibly a deepening of the attachment anxiety that made Anakin so exquisitely workable. What he had not factored was this. The anxiety was gone, not suppressed. He knew suppression. Had watched Anakin suppress things for years with the transparent effort of a man trying to hold water in his hands, the leakage always visible to anyone paying attention. This was not suppression. The anxiety was simply absent, the way furniture is absent from a room it was never put in. Palpatine had run his usual diagnostics, the gentle probe, the carefully positioned personal question, the reference to Padme that reliably produced a fractional tensing around Anakin's eyes, and found nothing. No tension, No hunger for reassurance. No subtle, desperate lean toward the paternal warmth Palpatine had spent years calibrating to exactly Anakin's frequency. The boy had looked at him yesterday and smiled with total, unperturbed ease, and Palpatine had felt, for the first time in a very long time, the mildly disorienting experience of not knowing what he was reading. He filed it. Serenity, achieved through whatever occurred on Mortis, chemical or spiritual or some force-adjacent mechanism he didn't fully understand. Consistent with advanced Jedi states he had observed and dismissed before. Harmless, possibly even counterproductive, serenity made men content, and content men didn't seek power. He moved on to the next problem, which was, in fact, the same problem, wearing different clothes. The bounty hunters were professionals. That was not in question. He had used them before, through cutouts clean enough that the chain of attribution would dissolve long before it reached anything traceable to him. 2 of them. A Weequay with a reputation for discretion, and a human woman who had worked Coruscant's mid-levels long enough to know every gap in the Senate security rotation. The target was Senator Amidala. The objective was not her death. Not yet. Too visible. Too many questions. But fear. A near miss. Something close enough to be genuinely terrifying. Something that would reach Anakin Skywalker through the bond Palpatine had spent years watching him try to hide, and would land in him as the specific electric terror of almost losing her. Fear of loss was the key. It had always been the key. The entire architecture of his investment in Anakin Skywalker was built on that foundation. Remove the serenity. Reintroduce the terror. Watch the attachment anxiety reassert itself with the additional force of an actual near miss behind it. A reliable mechanism. He had used variants of it before. He transmitted the instruction through the appropriate cutout and turned back to the window. Anakin knew about the bounty hunters before they reached Padme's floor. He had known the category of move was coming. Not this specific execution. He didn't have that level of precognitive detail, but the shape of it. Palpatine, reading the absence of fear as a problem to be solved, would manufacture a threat to what Anakin loved. That was the script. He had lived the script. He knew every line. He had been running quiet countermeasures for 4 days. Rex's men had been in the building since the day after the Camino mission. 3 troopers, plainclothes, cycling through the surrounding floors under a cover that required no explanation, because Rex had arranged it without requiring one. The surveillance system Anakin had deactivated for Padme's confession, he had replaced with his own. Cleaner, narrower, routed through a frequency Palpatine's office didn't monitor. The building's security rotation he had mapped in the first week back, identifying the gaps, quietly ensuring they were no longer gaps without alerting anyone to the fact that he'd found them. The bounty hunters hit the building at the 3rd hour past midnight. They were good. He noted this without sentiment. The Weequay came in through the ventilation access on level 47, with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done this specific type of entry many times, and the woman was already inside, already positioned at the service corridor intersection on Padme's level, when the trooper on the east stairwell identified her and transmitted the signal. Anakin was already in the corridor. He didn't ignite his saber. The decision was deliberate. No light, no sound. Nothing that would announce his position or give the Weequay, who had a detonator in his left hand, a target to orient on. He moved through the corridor in the specific darkness of a man who had learned to navigate confined spaces by force alone. The Weequay's position resolved into a clear, 3-dimensional picture by the force sense extending outward from him like water. The Weequay's detonator hand was pinned to the wall by the force before he cleared the ventilation hatch. Not violently, the precise application of exactly enough pressure to immobilize the hand and nothing more. The rest of the man's body controlled by the same focused telekinetic grip, held still and held complete. No escalation. No anger. The cold, practiced economy of someone who had done more difficult things than this under worse conditions and had no need to prove anything about it. "I need you to stay very still," Anakin said, very quietly, to the darkness. The Weequay stayed very still. The woman in the service corridor made one attempt, a blade, fast, genuinely professional, and found her wrist caught in a grip she couldn't break, and her feet no longer in contact with the floor. Ahsoka stepped from the secondary corridor entrance and took custody of her with the brisk efficiency of a Padawan who had been positioned there for 20 minutes and found the waiting more challenging than the actual work. Both of them alive, both restrained. The detonator on the floor. Rex's voice came through the comm, low and clear. "Building secured, sir. No casualties." Padme stood in her apartment doorway. She had heard enough to be awake and armed. A small holdout blaster, held correctly, safety off, the grip of a woman who knew what she was doing with it. Her eyes moved from the weequay pinned to the wall to Anakin in the corridor, standing in the dark, with the complete stillness of someone for whom this qualified as a quiet evening. She lowered the blaster. "You knew," she said. "I knew the kind of move he'd make. How long have you had people in the building?" 4 days. She looked at him for a moment with the expression of a woman recalibrating something. Not displeasure, something more complex than that. The specific look of a person who had believed they understood the scale of what they'd married and was discovering additional floors. "You could have told me," she said. "I could have," he agreed. "I didn't want you performing normal around people you knew were there. A beat. You're very good, but Palpatine is better. If you'd known, it would have been in something. The way you moved in the corridors, the way you checked corners. He has watchers in this building too." She absorbed this. "How many?" 3 that I've found. Possibly 4. Another recalibration. He watched her run the implications, the political mind doing what it did. Rapid and structured, pulling the thread through the maze. "We need to trace it back," she said. "All the way. Already started." He looked at the weequay, still pinned to the wall, observing the conversation with the expression of a professional who understood that what he was witnessing exceeded his original briefing considerably. He's going to tell us who hired him. And then we're going to follow that chain carefully and quietly until it reaches something a room full of Jedi Masters can't dismiss. Padme crossed the corridor. She stood beside him, looking at the same thing he was looking at. Not the bounty hunter, but the shape of what they were building. Brick by careful brick. The structure of an endgame that was finally truly visible. "Bail can help," she said. "He has access to Senate intelligence channels Palpatine doesn't fully control. If there's a chain, Bail can help us hold it." "Good, discreet. He's the most discreet man I know." She paused. "He'll have questions. He can have them. We'll answer the ones we can." Somewhere in the building's infrastructure, Rex was running the secondary sweep. Ahsoka had the woman secured, and was conducting herself with the professional quiet of a Padawan, who understood that what she was participating in was larger than she had been briefed, and had decided, correctly, that the questions could wait. Anakin looked at the evidence in front of him, the detonator on the floor, the chain that led backward from it through the cutout and the instruction, and the transmission, and the man who had sent it, sitting in his office at this exact moment, looking out at Coruscant's lights, believing that fear was on its way. He felt something move through him. Not triumph, he had been careful about triumph, had learned what it could cost. Something quieter. More grave. The specific sensation of an ending that had been too long in coming becoming, finally, visible on the horizon. 20 years too late the first time. Not this time. The doors sealed with a sound like a held breath. 4 men in a circle of empty chairs. The other seats, 11 of them, curved and waiting, stood vacant around them. The absent council members replaced by the specific weight of what was about to be said in their stead. Afternoon light came through the chamber's windows at the low angle of a day ending, painting the floor in long amber bars that moved imperceptibly as the city turned below. Mace Windu stood at the window with his back to the room. Yoda occupied his chair with the stillness of something that had been in this chamber longer than most of the architecture, and intended to outlast whatever was about to happen in it. Obi-Wan stood near the door, not blocking it, simply near it, the positioning of a man who wanted to be equidistant from everything, until he understood what everything was. Anakin stood in the center of the room. He had not asked permission to stand there. He had walked in and taken the position that the geometry of the moment required, and the room had arranged itself around him in the way rooms arrange themselves around the thing, with the most gravity in them. He was aware of what this looked like to 4 different sets of eyes, and he had no objection to any of their readings. "You've asked for a sealed session," Mace said, still facing the window. "No record. No attendance." Guards dismissed. He turned. His expression was the controlled level expression of a man who had decided to hear this before he decided how he felt about it, which was as much as Anakin had expected from him and more than he'd had in the other life. Whatever you're about to say, Skywalker, understand that the threshold for sealed sessions is significant. This better be significant. It is, Anakin said. Then begin. He began with the chips. Not with Palpatine. Not with Sidious. Not with the full history of the galaxy disclosure that was coming. With the chips. Because the chips were concrete, verifiable, and the kind of immediate existential threat that a room of Jedi Masters could grab with both hands before he asked them to reach for something larger. He laid it out in the war room pattern, rapid declarative, each sentence a piece of intel, the chain of implications following clean and logical behind them. The inhibitor chips. Their location in clone brain architecture. Their function. The command structure they were designed to respond to. He watched Mace's face as the picture assembled itself, and the picture did what pictures do when they are true. It became undeniable by increments, each new piece of information clicking into place with the horrible, irresistible logic of something that had been there all along, and simply hadn't been looked at directly. Mace sat down. It was not a dramatic gesture. It was the involuntary response of a man whose legs have made a decision before his mind finished processing the information that necessitated it. He looked at Anakin with the expression of a soldier who has just been shown the mechanism of a threat that has been inside his perimeter for years. The entire army of the Republic, Mace said. Slowly, with the precision of someone testing whether the sentence was actually real. Every clone. A kill switch. Keyed to a voice command, Anakin said. One order. 2 words. Yoda's eyes had not moved from Anakin's face since he began. The ancient gaze steady and deep, reading something in him that existed below the information he was conveying. The Force signature underneath the words. The texture of the truth as it moved through the room. Deactivated, Yoda said. Not a question. 4 days ago. Camino. All of them. A silence. The amber light moved another fraction across the floor. You went to Camino. Obi-Wan said from near the door, his voice doing the careful thing it did, without filing a mission report, without council authorization, without time to do it the right way, Anakin said, and the reply came not with defensiveness, but with the flat certainty of a man who knows the difference between protocol and priority. With respect, Master Kenobi, if I had brought this to a formal session first, how many of those sessions do you think Palpatine's intelligence network would have needed to learn that someone was asking questions about clone behavioral modification? 1? 2? Obi-Wan closed his mouth. The logic was not comfortable. He accepted it anyway, which was one of the things about him that had always made him who he was. The inhibitor chips are the foundation, Anakin said. What they were built for is the superstructure. He looked at each of them in turn, not seeking permission, taking the measure of what he was asking each of them to hold. Darth Sidious is alive. He has been operating on Coruscant for decades. He controls both sides of this war. The room received this. Mace was the first to find his voice. That's a significant claim. It is. Significant claims require evidence, Anakin said. Yes, I have it. He produced the chain, the bounty hunters, the cutout, the transmission record that Bail Organa's contacts had pulled from the Senate Intelligence Archive with the careful, deniable hands of a man who understood exactly what he was handling. He walked them through it piece by piece, the same logical architecture, each link demonstrated before the next was introduced. Palpatine's connection to the assassination attempt on Padme. The financial routing. The specific communication protocol that matched, precisely, the profile of separatist command communications they had been unable to source for 2 years. Both sides of the war. One hand. Mace looked at the evidence with the expression of a man who has spent his entire career in service of a truth he believed he understood and has been shown the crack running through its foundation. And how, Mace said, his voice level, his eyes hard, does a Padawan turned knight come to possess knowledge like this? The question had an edge. It had always had an edge, Mace Windu's specific professional suspicion of Anakin Skywalker was one of the few things in the canon that Anakin had, on reflection, come to understand rather than resent. He had not been trustworthy. He had given the man every reasonable cause for concern. He could not undo that, but he could answer for it honestly. "Because I've already lived the war where you didn't listen to me in time, Master Windu," he said. Steady, unflinching, not with anger. The anger was simply not there, which was its own kind of statement. "I watched this order die because good men kept asking the wrong questions instead of the right ones. I'm done answering to fear. I'd rather answer to truth." The silence that followed was the longest one in the room so far. Mace looked at him. The hard edge in his expression did not soften, exactly. Mace Windu's face was not built for softening, but something in its composition shifted. The suspicion remained. Underneath it, something else had arrived. The specific, reluctant recalibration of an intelligent man who has measured a thing against his existing framework and found the framework insufficient. He looked at Yoda. Yoda had not moved, had not spoken since the single word of confirmation about the chips. He sat in his chair with the weight of 900 years settled into him, and his eyes were on Anakin, and they had been on Anakin the entire time, and in them was something Anakin had not seen directed at himself in either lifetime. "Recognition? Speak, Master Yoda," Obi-Wan said quietly, from the door. "Whatever you're sensing, the rest of us need to hear it." Yoda was quiet for one more moment. Then he spoke, and his voice carried the specific gravity of something that does not make pronouncements lightly, and is making one now. "In this room," Yoda said, "a presence I have not felt in a very long time. Older than this body. Wiser than this age." The ancient eyes moved slowly from Anakin's face to the amber light on the floor and back. "Carry two lives. He does. The weight of both. Feel it. I can. True, what he says is. All of it. Darker, it is, than even he has told us." A pause. "And yet, come back from the dark. He has. Proof he carries. The only proof that exists. That choose the light, one can. Even from the very bottom of the dark." The chamber was very still. Obi-Wan's breath was audible in the silence. Not panic. The slow, careful respiration of a man absorbing something seismic and choosing to remain standing. Mace set the evidence down on the nearest chair. He looked at it for a moment. Then he looked at Anakin with the expression of a man making a decision that has been made for him by facts he cannot dispute, and is making it anyway, deliberately, as an act of will rather than a concession. "You went to Kamino without authorization," Mace said. "You conducted a private intelligence operation on Coruscant. You've been running a parallel security network inside a building under Senate jurisdiction." He paused. "All of which, if your evidence holds, it holds," Anakin said. "Amounts to the most consequential act of unilateral service this order has ever received from a Jedi Knight." He said it the way he said difficult things. Without decoration, without the softening that would have made it easier to dismiss. "What do you need from us?" Anakin looked at the four of them. The amber light was nearly gone now. The chamber moving into the blue of early evening, the city below shifting into its night configuration. "Authorization," he said. "Coordinated, immediate, before Palpatine decides the data he's been reading is wrong and becomes something harder to corner." Yoda's ears rose slightly. The small, unmistakable gesture of a decision made. "Authorized, this is," Yoda said. "Move. We must." Tonight, Anakin's jaw set, not with fear, with the clean, irrevocable hardness of a man stepping through the last door between himself and the thing he came back to do. The mask came off at the window. Not literally. Palpatine had no mask, had never needed one, had worn the face of a kindly statesman for so long that the architecture of the deception had become load-bearing. Structural. As permanent as the Senate dome visible through the glass behind him. But something shifted in the set of his shoulders as he stood at that window in the deep of the Coruscant night, something that had nothing to do with the Chancellor and everything to do with what lived underneath him. He had run the numbers. He was always running the numbers. They no longer added up. Three things had converged in the last 6 hours. The Camino Administrator's flag, a minor anomaly in the Behavioral Modification Archive, access logged at a timestamp corresponding to Skywalker's maintenance visit, nothing confirmed but nothing dismissible. The bounty hunters, who had not reported in, and were not going to. Which meant they had been taken alive. Which meant there was a chain. And Masameda, who had intercepted a fragment of sealed council communication, encrypted, source unverified, content unknown, that had triggered a secondary security protocol Palpatine had installed in the temple's comm infrastructure years ago. A sealed session. No record. 4 participants. He knew which 4. The game was not over. The game was never over until he decided it was. But the board had changed, and the pieces were not where he had placed them, and the player across from him was not the frightened boy he had spent a decade building toward a single moment of catastrophic choice. He needed to move now, before the council could coordinate. Before whatever Skywalker had assembled could be brought to bear in an organized fashion. Flee to contingency, activate the Separatist endgame from a secured position, let the war consume the Jedi while he reconstituted. The door opened. 3 of them. Mace Windu first, the way a battering ram comes first. Direct, purposeful, carrying the specific authority of a man who has decided and will not be undecided. Obi-Wan Kenobi to his left, controlled, professional, with the careful bearing of someone who has processed something enormous and moved through it into clarity. And behind them both, unhurried, Anakin Skywalker. Palpatine turned from the window. He assembled the Chancellor's face, the surprise, the warm concern, the slightly flustered dignity of a man interrupted at a late hour. He assembled it in the time it took to turn, which was fast, which had always been fast, because he had been doing this for so long that the transition was nearly unconscious. He looked at Anakin's face, and the Chancellor's face stayed where he'd put it. But something underneath it went very still. The boy was watching him. Not with the desperate, searching look of a young man hoping to be reassured. Not with fear or anger or the barely suppressed hunger that had always been visible in him if you knew where to look. With the quiet, total attention of something that already knows the answer to every question in the room and is waiting, without urgency, for the room to catch up. The still thing underneath Palpatine's composure understood in that moment, before the words, before the evidence, in the immediate and irreversible way that old predators recognize when they have been hunted, that it was over. He reached for the saber hidden in his desk in the same motion as he dropped the Chancellor's face. Mace's blade came up. Obi-Wan's beside it. Not attacking, containing, the experienced geometry of 2 men who have trained for exactly this configuration and are holding the room's exits in their peripheral vision while keeping their eyes on the threat. Palpatine moved. He was fast. Genuinely. Cosmically fast. The speed of a man who had practiced this art for 60 years, and had never in those 60 years had cause to be less than everything he was. The blade crossed the desk in a diagonal that would have opened Mace from shoulder to hip, redirected in the same motion toward Obi-Wan's exposed flank, and the Force was in it, the dark side weight of decades behind every movement, the specific and terrible efficiency of a Sith Master who had survived by never giving an opponent the second breath they needed to recover. Mace caught the first cut. Obi-Wan stepped inside the second. They were good. They were both genuinely, extraordinarily good, and it showed in the 3 seconds that followed. The blade worked tight and controlled, and without wasted motion, 2 experienced men holding a contained engagement with a third combatant who outclassed both of them individually. Anakin stood still. He watched Palpatine move, the footwork, the blade angles, the dark side current underneath every attack like a river under ice, and he felt nothing that fear would recognize as fear. He felt the situation the way a surgeon feels an operation, present, precise, the clinical attention of someone who knows exactly what needs to happen and is waiting for the moment that makes it possible. Palpatine sensed the stillness and read it wrong. He had always read Anakin's stillness as suppressed emotion. He read it as such now, stepped back from Mace's riposte, redirected his attention toward the young man standing at the room's center, and let the Force build behind his free hand. "You could have stood beside me," Palpatine said. His voice had dropped the Chancellor entirely. This was the other voice, The voice Anakin had heard for 2 decades from inside a suit and had spent every day since trying to forget the sound of. Graveled, ancient, the voice of something that had been old before the Republic was young. You were made for this, Anakin. Everything you are was built for. I know what I was built for, Anakin said. That's not what I'm here for. The lightning came. Not a warning. Not a probe. Everything. 60 years of dark-side mastery released in a single sustained discharge. The kind of power that had killed lesser men before they registered it had been deployed. The room's ambient light strobed. The windows behind Palpatine fractured along their edges without shattering. The air itself smelled of ozone and something older and more wrong than ozone, the specific atmospheric signature of the dark side expressed at full force in a confined space. Anakin stepped forward. Not back. Not sideways. Forward. Into it, his hands coming up with the unhurried, practiced motion of someone performing a technique they have drilled past the point of conscious execution. His palms met the lightning, and the lightning met him, and for a breath that was the whole of the world, this, only this, the full output of the most dangerous Sith Lord alive, pouring into the hands of a 45-year-old soul in a 21-year-old body. It hurt. He allowed himself to know this, without allowing it to matter. 20 years in a suit powered partly by suppressed pain had taught him the distinction between pain and damage, between sensation and collapse. The lightning was dark-side energy, and dark-side energy was something he understood in the cellular, structural, inarguable way that a man understands the language he was raised in. He had generated it himself. He had channeled it through his own body in both directions, as weapon and as current, and the grammar of it was not foreign to him. He had spent 20 years learning exactly what it costs. He held it. The lightning ran across his palms and up his forearms, and he held it the way you hold something you have decided to hold. Not straining. Not fighting the force of it. Simply being the thing it cannot move. Palpatine pushed harder. Then, harder. The yellow eyes, fully exposed now, working through something that was not quite disbelief. Sith Lords do not permit themselves disbelief, but occupied the same space. He had expected resistance. He had not expected this. Mace moved. Not the killing blow, the containing blow. The Vapad Master's art of using an opponent's own returning energy, and what returned from Anakin's held palms was the lightning redirected with the precision of someone who had chosen the angle with full deliberation. It caught Palpatine's blade arm and drove it out and up, and in the opening that created, Obi-Wan closed the geometry from the left, and the three of them had him. Cornered, contained, the lightsabers holding the angles. Palpatine looked at them. The yellow eyes moved from Mace to Obi-Wan to Anakin, and back, running the calculation that the greatest strategic mind of the age ran when presented with a closed room and 3 Jedi and no remaining plays. The calculation came up empty. He looked at Anakin for a long moment, and for the first time in the entire span of Anakin's experience of this man, across 2 lives, across decades of manipulation and proximity, and the intimate horror of knowing him completely, something that was not performance moved across his face. Not fear. Palpatine had burned fear out of himself with the rest of his humanity before Anakin was born. Something older and colder than fear. The thing underneath fear, once fear is no longer available. Recognition that the thing standing across from him was not the weapon he built, was something else entirely. Anakin looked back at him. The grief in him was real, not for this man, not for what he was losing, but for what this man had cost the galaxy, and would have cost it again and again across the infinite, terrible variations of a history that kept producing him. He felt it the way he had learned to feel difficult things, completely, without armor, without allowing it to become something it wasn't. He raised his blade. "This is for every version of the galaxy," he said, very quietly. "You never got to burn." The silence arrived. It was not triumphant. It was the silence of an ending. The specific, heavy quiet of a thing that had been in motion for a very long time, coming to rest. The ozone smell lingered. The fractured window edges caught the city's light and threw it in fragments across the floor. Somewhere below them, Coruscant continued its endless blazing business, entirely unaware. Mace stood with his blade still lit, breathing with the controlled discipline of a man who processes combat physiologically before he processes it emotionally. Obi-Wan had lowered his saber. He was looking at the floor, not avoiding. Simply present with something that required a moment's presence before it became anything else. Anakin extinguished his blade. The three of them stood in the wreckage of the office, the overturned furniture, the fractured windows, the scorch marks the lightning had left in the ceiling, and breathed, and were alive, and the Sith were gone. Not triumphant. Not yet. That would come later, or it wouldn't, and either way it was not what this moment was. This moment was just the three of them. Breathing, standing in the place where it ended. Free, the war ended not with a declaration, but with a silence that spread. It took time. These things always take time. The momentum of a war doesn't stop the moment its architect is removed. The way a river doesn't stop the moment a dam upstream is opened. There were separatist commanders who kept fighting for weeks out of genuine conviction, or inertia, or the simple logistical fact that the order to stop had not yet reached them. There were political crises in the Senate that required Padme's specific and formidable attention across 18-hour days that left her exhausted in ways she did not complain about. There were hearings and investigations, and the careful, painstaking work of dismantling an intelligence network that Palpatine had spent 40 years embedding into every institution of the Republic like mycelium through soil. Anakin was present for very little of this, by choice. What he was present for was the clone troopers. He stood in the Coruscant barracks with Rex 3 days after the Chancellor's office, and they walked the rows together while Rex explained. In the direct, no ceremony way Rex explained everything, what it felt like when the chips went dark. The men had known something changed. Most of them couldn't articulate what. Only that a weight they hadn't registered as weight was no longer there. A pressure behind the eyes. A frequency in the back of the mind that had been constant for so long it had been mistaken for silence. Rex told him this without looking at him. Anakin listened without apologizing, because apologies were the wrong shape for what he owed these men, and Rex would have found them insulting anyway. What he said instead, quietly, at the end of the row, was, "It's permanent. All of them. And there are people in the Senate who are going to fight very hard to make sure the word citizen applies to every man in this building. You have my word on that." Rex had looked at him for a long moment. "Yes, sir," Rex said. The same words he always said. Entirely different weight behind them. The formal session convened 6 weeks later. The council chamber held its usual configuration, 12 seats, the full circle. But the light in it was different somehow. The same afternoon amber as always, the same windows, the same ancient stone. The difference was in the quality of the attention in the room. Something had shifted in the bearing of the masters present. A collective adjustment too subtle to name directly but unmistakable to anyone paying attention. The room had been humbled, not broken, not diminished, but genuinely, structurally revised in its understanding of what it didn't know. Anakin stood in the center of it, and felt no particular satisfaction about this. He had not come for satisfaction. Mace spoke first, which was right. Mace was the one who had needed convincing most, and had been convinced most completely, and the authority of that arc was not lost on anyone in the room. "The Council has discussed at length," Mace said, "what this moment requires, what is owed, what it means, going forward." He paused in the way Mace paused, not for effect, but because the next words required the extra weight of deliberateness. "We are offering you the rank of Grand Master Skywalker, unprecedented, for someone your age, for someone whose formal training was a fractional pause that was as close to diplomatic as Mace Windu got. Unconventional. But we are not offering it out of convention. We are offering it because the Force has made its own assessment of your rank, and it would be dishonest of us to offer you less." The chamber was quiet. Anakin looked at them, the full circle, each face holding its own version of the same carefully composed invitation. Obi-Wan near the window, watching him with the expression of someone who already suspected what the answer would be, and was making peace with it. Yoda in his chair, small and ancient and entirely still. His eyes warm with the specific warmth of a being who understands that knowing the right answer and being able to take it yourself are different kinds of wisdom. "I'm grateful," Anakin said, and meant it, not as preamble to rejection, but as a complete statement of something real. "I understand what you're offering. I understand how much it costs you to offer it. I don't want you to think I'm dismissing that." He let that settle. "I already gave the galaxy everything I had to give as a soldier and a symbol," he said. "What I want now is to just be a person, a husband, a father." The word landed differently than it would have 6 months ago. It landed with the full weight of 2 children who existed now, unmistakably and increasingly, and who had a father who was present and whole. "I think I've earned that." Nobody argued. Yoda's ears rose slightly. The small gesture that meant a great many things at once. Acceptance, understanding, the ancient confirmation of a mind that had lived long enough to know that wisdom sometimes looks like stepping back. "Earned it," Yoda said quietly. "You have. More than any being I have known." The political obstacles to a public marriage had the durability of most political obstacles when confronted by a senator with Padme's specific combination of intelligence, institutional knowledge, and complete personal conviction that the rule in question was wrong. The Jedi Code's position on attachment went through 3 months of council deliberation that produced, ultimately, a formal acknowledgement that the Code had perhaps confused attachment with possession, love with fear, and that a Jedi who had demonstrated the capacity to love without being destroyed by the loss of the thing loved was perhaps not the argument for restriction it had previously been assumed to be. Anakin was not present for most of those deliberations. He was on Naboo. The lake house sat in the morning light the way it had always sat, the stone warm, the water moving, the Naboo countryside stretching out in every direction with the particular abundance of a place that has been at peace for long enough to look like peace is its natural state. Luke was attempting to levitate a stone. He was 3 years old and extremely serious about it. His face held the specific gravity of someone performing a task they have decided matters, his small hands extended toward the stone on the grass in front of him, his brow furrowed with an effort that was, at this stage, producing no discernible result, but was also producing no discernible discouragement. Leia was watching him from the grass beside the water, with the expression of someone who had already decided this was taking too long, and was exercising heroic patience in not saying so. She was 3 years old, and had opinions about most things. The opinions were frequently correct, which she was too young to be humble about and too honest to pretend otherwise. Anakin sat between them, not coaching, not instructing, simply present, cross-legged in the grass, forearms on his knees, watching his son try to move a stone by the power of his own extraordinary mind, and feeling something he had no word for that was somewhere between gratitude and awe, and the specific physical reality of a man who had been given back something he had not deserved to be given back. The stone moved. A fraction, a millimeter maybe, but it moved. Luke looked up at him immediately, the instinctive, exultant look of someone who has done a thing and needs confirmation from the most trusted available source that the thing was real. "Did you see?" Luke said. "I saw," Anakin said. Luke looked at the stone again with renewed conviction. Leia leaned over and looked at it too, then looked at her brother, then looked at her father, and her expression communicated with perfect clarity that she was reserving judgment about whether 1 millimeter counted. Obi-Wan came around the side of the house with Ahsoka beside him, and the sight of it, the two of them, together, moving through an afternoon on Naboo with no war behind them, and no war ahead, was something Anakin allowed himself to look at directly for a moment, without trying to carry it carefully. Just looked at it. Let it be exactly the size it was. Ahsoka had brought food, which she handed to Leia first because she had learned early that Leia's opinions about the order in which things were distributed were not negotiable. Obi-Wan settled onto the grass nearby with the practiced ease of a man who had been doing this on his days off for 6 months and had discovered, possibly to his own surprise, that he was good at it. They talked. About nothing in particular. About the lake and the food and whether Luke's stone had actually moved, or whether the wind had been responsible. A question Leia raised with a scientific precision that made Obi-Wan's mouth twitch, and about the neighboring family dinner the following week, and the particular diplomatic complexity of Padme's mother, who had opinions about punctuality that rivaled her daughter's opinions about justice. The afternoon moved the way afternoons move, in places that know how to hold them. At some point the children migrated toward the water under Ahsoka's supervision, and Obi-Wan fell into a comfortable quiet beside Anakin, and the two of them sat in the grass with the lake in front of them and the sky above them, doing what the sky on Naboo always did, which was to be unreasonably beautiful without appearing to be aware of it. After a while Obi-Wan said, "Are you happy?" Anakin looked at the water, at Leia crouching at the shore examining something she'd found, at Luke beside her, distracted from the stone by the superior mystery of whatever his sister was looking at Ahsoka standing behind them both with her arms crossed, and her montrals tilted at the angle they tilted when she was paying close attention while pretending she wasn't. "Yes," he said. Not as a performance, not as a reassurance. As a fact, specific and evidenced, the kind of yes that doesn't require anything else. He looked up at the sky. The Naboo sky at this hour was the deep, clear blue of something that has never had to be anything else, and he looked at it the way he had looked at a great many things since Mortis, without checking it for threats, without cataloging its tactical implications, without the low-frequency vigilance that had been his resting state for so long that he had confused it with being awake. Just looked at it. In another life, another version of him had burned, had stood at this exact age on a volcanic plain and made a choice that the galaxy had paid for across decades and generations and an incalculable weight of grief. In another version, the sky above him had been fire. This sky was blue. He did not close his eyes. He held the sky in his gaze and let it be what it was, and felt 2 lifetimes settle in him like sediment in still water, present, held, no longer in motion. I did such terrible things, once, he thought. In another life, another version of me, another galaxy's worth of grief. But not this time. Not ever again. This time, I finally got to be the man I always should have been. The lake moved against the shore. The children's voices crossed the afternoon. Obi-Wan sat beside him in the grass, present and alive, and said nothing. Because nothing was exactly right, the chosen one closed his eyes and rested. Let us know what you'd like to see next. The end.